Alrighty. So I know quite a few of the people here probably already know all this stuff, but I know that wanted to do this because I seen on the forum there's a whole bunch of people keep coming in, new people in the Discord that have been coming in and asking a lot of new questions. So I wanted to do another introduction into the hobby for everybody and some tips and stuff that I've learned. So the first, you can go ahead and go on to the next, start the slides. So the first one is, what is aquascaping? That's the definition that comes up when you Google it. It's the craft of arranging aquatic plants as well as rocks, stones, cave work, or driftwood in an aesthetically pleasing manner within an aquarium. In effect, gardening underwater. As I think aquascaping is, as long as there's something to do with plants, I think aquascaping can be whatever you want it to be. I mean, you don't even need to have plants. Plenty of blackwater aquascapes out there and biotopes that don't have it. So aquascaping for me it's a really wide category and so much you can do with it. And then the next slide. Here we have a list of the majority of the aquatic plant types. You got your rhizome plants with a couple of examples like Anubias, Bucephalandra, Java fern. Those usually require low light, low tech, easy to grow. If you put them in too much light, they will tend to grow algae. You propagate them just by cutting the rhizome. Usually you want to have at least 2 or 3 leaves on each side of the rhizome where you split it, you cut it, and then one piece becomes 2. For stem plants, we got Rotala, Ludwigia, Pogostemon. I mean, there's hornwort, there's all kinds of stem plants. The majority of those can do well in both low tech and high tech. Some of the Rotalas and some of the more high-tech pogos you're going to want highlight and CO2. Those are propagated by just trimming the plant, and whatever you trim off, just replant. I usually try to trim down to about the bottom third of the plant and replant the top. It gives you a nice bushy look. And then after that, you have your bulb and division plants like Aereo, Blixa, Tiger Lotus. Some of those are really high tech. Some of those can be really low tech, like Tiger Lotus. I have Tiger Lotus growing in 2 tanks that have no CO2, very low light. Aereo, there's some of those that will do okay, but those are usually a harder to take care of plant, and they like softer water, CO2, higher light. Those plants, you propagate them by pulling the whole plant, and they divide either on their own, like Aereo and Blixa. You'll be able to pull the whole plant and split it up into several, depending on the age of the plant. Tiger Lotus, usually if you want to propagate that, you'll have to cut the bulb. You'll see new leaves and offshoots shooting out, and then you want to cut the bulb and then replant both of those bulbs. Then you have chain and runner plants like Jungle Val, Dwarf Chainsword, Dwarf Sagittaria, Monte Carlo. The majority of the carpet plants are chain and runner plants. For like plants like Jungle Val, super easy to grow. Monte Carlo, super easy to grow. There are some that are high-tech plants. To propagate them, you just cut the runner and replant the runner wherever you want. The Jungle Val is known to send offshoots like all the way across the tank. So sometimes you'll have to pull up the offshoot and find that runner and cut the chain on it. And then you have moss, Java moss, Christmas moss, Pilea. I'd say probably about 99% of those are really super easy to grow in low tech. There are some of the harder mosses out there that I kind of call them designer mosses that have gotten popular in the last couple of years that are a little bit harder to grow, but the majority of them is just kind of a plop it in your tank and it'll grow. For propagating that, and just about any piece that you cut will grow on its own. And then you got floating plants like red root floaters, dwarf water lettuce, salvinia, riccia. I know that there's been a lot of confusion with riccia in this hobby. It is a floating plant. It does not attach itself to anything, and it does not have roots. People have had success tying it down and keeping it constantly trimmed so it doesn't melt through the netting that it's tied down with. But the best bet for that is I use it in my guppy breeding tanks. It floats like crazy. So then the next slide. And then the one after that, this is going to be different Aquascape styles. We have the Iwagumi. That's one of my favorites. The Iwokumi, it's one of the most challenging aquascape styles out there, developed around 30 years ago by the famous aquarist Takashi Amano. This type of aquascape represents not just a minimalist layout. It also reflects the Japanese culture, spirituality, and love for beauty and simplicity. It's known for its intricate rock work, which provides the main focal points. Usually the rule of thirds applies to the tank, where you divide your tank into 3 ways, vertically and horizontally, and where the lines cross, those are your focal points. You usually use odd numbers of rocks. Small schooling fish are often used for the livestock because you want it to accentuate the aquascape. You don't want to have say like you got like a 50-gallon tank like that. You don't want to dump in a bunch of big cichlids or something, or even dwarf cichlids, and have them going nuts and take away attention from the aquascape as a whole. And then the next one, another one of my favorites, is the Dutch Aquascape. The Dutch aquarium style does not imply the use of wood, rocks, or other hardscape materials. The main focus is placed upon the growth and arrangement of aquatic plants. Traditionally, Dutch planted aquariums are compared to underwater gardens. However, differentiating from the nature style, Dutch aquascapes are not meant to resemble a specific biotope. The intricate placement and grouping of plants help create in-depth perspective within the aquarium by complementing each other in shape and color. Fish are secondary and livestock is minimal to keep the focus on the plants and the aquascape. I think it's actually kind of funny that they have angels in there. It's not something I would have done in a Dutch aquascape, but I think it actually fits really well with the color. Bright colored plants usually different leaf shapes next to each other. So you've got your Rotala Walichi over there, nice and colorful, but it's right behind some Rotala, another different type of Rotala that's red right there, and next to some nice bright green broadleaf plants. You have your trails that help direct people's perspective to the focal points. It's a really, really intricate style. I have a really long thread about how to do it on the forum if anybody wants to know about that. And then the next slide. We have the nature style. This style is characterized by attention to the alignment and grouping of rocks, driftwood, and aquatic plants in order to create an underwater miniature representation of particular terrestrial landscapes. So pretty much you're recreating nature in your tank. Fish and livestock are chosen to accentuate the aquascape. Usually a school of nanofish, as well as cleanup crews like snails, shrimp, algae eaters. And I think in a nature tank, you can keep just about any type of fish in there. You know, there's not really too many rules on your fish choice. The majority of people do a schooling fish just because it looks really nice with them being able to swim through the driftwood, the rock work, and everything. So the next slide. This next one, you don't see all that often. And I don't know why, because I think it's a really, really awesome looking aquascaping style. It's the Taiwanese style. It makes use of high terraces, illusions of depth, rich plant life, and small replicas or items placed in the tank to create a feeling of life in the design. The Taiwanese style tends to blend Dutch and Iwagumi influences in maintaining simplicity and organization, with the end objective being to create an aquascape that is alive and healthy. I know that there's one aquascape picture that a couple years ago was real famous. It was like it went viral. It was the Hobbit house aquascape, where they recreated the Shire with from Lord of the Rings. That is pretty much in essence a Taiwanese aquascape, based on just the description of what they are. And then on the next slide, this is probably one of the newest aquascaping styles that has being popular. It's getting popular all over on Instagram right now. It's the Ikebana. It's basically a bowl or decorative pot inside the tank. You keep your substrate very clean, neat. All the plants and everything are arranged and planted inside the pot. And that's usually where you have your aquatic soil, or whether or not you want to do dirt with a sand cap. Still learning more about that style and whether or not it has any specific things that they try to do to make it look better like other aquascaping styles, or if it's just, whatever looks good to your eye at that time. And then the next one, we have the jungle aquascaping style. The jungle aquascaping style is considered to be a combination of Dutch and nature styles, incorporating traits such as dense plant life and unique focal points. The defining characteristic of a jungle aquascape is its presentation. The purpose of a jungle aquascape is to depict a chaotic, boundless, and wild ecosystem. I think at one point or another, we've all, if you're in the hobby for more than a year, I think at some point we all end up with a jungle tank by accident. You just start throwing plants in there, you get collectoritis, and then suddenly you think it looks really cool, and you keep it that way, and you got your jungle tank. There aren't really too many rules, too much. It's pretty much whatever looks good. You don't want to have too many things out of place and in weird spots, but if it looks good to you, then it's your jungle. And then the next one, we have the Wallstad method aquascape. It uses large amounts of plants to act as the filtration, low to medium lighting, little to no exterior filtration, usually just a small power head with a sponge. You have a moderate amount of livestock, because the excess food and fish waste become nutrients for the plants. Usually you have a layer of dirt capped with sand or gravel. The dirt provides all the nutrients to the roots of the plants and can be nutrient rich for about 10 years or more. You can go long periods of time with little to no maintenance. The best way to set up this tank is to set it up to where you don't want to put your hands in the tank anymore, similar to how people take care of their saltwater and reef tanks. Besides maintenance, trimming the plants and topping it off, if you set it up right, it's usually looking at a water change maybe once or twice a year. And then we have the next slide. Is aquascaping right for you? Do you have the time? Do you have the cost? Do you know the cost? Have you already looked up the price range that you're in, and do you want to keep going forward at that cost? Do you want to do the maintenance? Pretty much there's a setup for everyone. That tank right there. That's probably one of my best looking aquascapes, but it was probably my cheapest aquascape. That tank I got for, I believe it was $5 in a SCAPE auction. The light is a clip-on desk lamp from Walmart with a 6500K CFL bulb from Home Depot. That light costs less than $20, and then the filter on the back and a heater. I never did any dosing to the tank. It was very, very low tech, so the plants didn't grow much. I mean, It was pretty much looked the same for quite a while, but it's very, very easy, very low maintenance. So then on the next slide, we have two different examples of a setup. On the left, you have what was the beginning of my 40-gallon Dutch tank before I planted it, but you can see it's just a basic 40 breeder from Petco at the $1 per gallon sale. It's got one of the Brooklyn stands, or no, that's actually on my Etzel rack, muscle rack stand. It's got 3 of those clip-on desk lamps. It's got a canister, there's a canister filter and a heater. And then on the right, that's Ryan's tank, Ryan_Scape guy on Instagram. That is probably one of the highest end setups that you can get. He's got, I believe that's a Chihiro's Vivid 2 light, right, Ryan? And he's got it suspended over the hanging rack to make it look really nice and clean. He's got the glass lily pipe return and inflow. He's got his CO2 going. It's a UNS rimless tank. It's like you can set up for everyone. You can go bare bottom and go and run with it, or you can go top of the line and run with it. And then the next slide, this is about whether or not you want to convert your existing tank or not. That's my tank about 2 months before I joined SCAPE. That was a 29-gallon tank with an Oscar, a convex cichlid, and a common Placostomus. They should never have been in that tank. A horrible gravel. But pretty much when if you have a tank like that and you're wanting to get into aquascaping, the most important question is your lighting. Is your lighting sufficient? The majority of the time are just decorative fish tanks like that. The lights that they come with in the kits and stuff, they're never going to grow plants well enough for you to be successful. You might get away with some floaters at the top of the water or a little bit of moss, but you're going to want to upgrade the light if you're going that route. Your substrate, I had ugly black and red gravel there. One thing that I do like about gravel is if you do want to convert an existing fish tank over to a planted tank, it's an old fish tank and you haven't done much gravel vacuuming, all those holes and crevices in the gravel where the fish waste and stuff falls into, that actually becomes a really good nutrient bed for low tech plants like such as jungle val, anacharis, hornwort. You can have success with some old gravel in an old tank. Then you got your nutrients. Whether what you're going to want to do going forward, or you're going to want to just have a nutrient-rich substrate? Are you going to want to do liquid fertilizers? Are you going to want to just try to keep the plants alive with just the nutrients from the excess fish waste? You have to think about your filtration on that tank. I just had a tiny little, I believe that was an Aquanon 20 flow hang on back, so it was even underrated for a 29-gallon plus with the fish at one point or another too. I think everybody starts out with an Oscar in like a 10-gallon. Petco sells them that way. And then you want to think about your CO2 and your expectations. I think CO2 and expectations should go together hand in hand. What's your expectations? Do you want to grow nothing but low-tech plants and you never want to have to deal with CO2 tanks or DIY CO2? Well, do you have high expectations where you want an aquascape similar to the one that was pictured in Ryan's tank? You're going to want the CO2. So I'm going to find out what your expectations are, and then also with your cost. Do you have the money to convert everything over? Because ultimately, the conversion process, I think, costs a lot more money and takes a lot more time. That tank right there went through, I have pictures at the end of the progress, but it went through so many transformations and so many lights and so many different substrates because I was learning and I would want to change something. So that to me, up here on the next slide, I think that this is usually the better overall option for people wanting to get into aquascaping. Start a brand new setup. whether or not if you're just wanting to experiment with the hobby, just go out and get yourself a small little 10-gallon tank. Even brand new, those tanks are like 25, 30, 35 bucks, depending on where you go for the 10-gallon curved rimless. You have a blank slate to choose your Aquascape style, whether or not you want to go low tech, high tech, Dutch, Iwagumi. You can choose a tank style. You don't have to necessarily go out and get a 10-gallon tank. There's so many new different types of tank styles out there that UNS and ADA has been coming out with. You can have a shallow, wide tank. You can have a long, skinny tank. You can have a tall tank. You can start your lighting from scratch. I always suggest buying the best light that you can afford that is adjustable. You're going to want some adjustability in a light because that creates longevity in the light. You don't want something that's just on and off, because if it's just a highlight, puts out tons and tons of par just on and off, well, if you decide you want to start growing low-tech plants, well, now you have to buy a new light, where you can just get something adjustable and turn it down. Substrate. You can choose your substrate from the get-go. You don't have to worry about ripping out tons of old gravel while the fish are in a barrel somewhere. You can do dirt with a sand cap. You can do inert, just sand with root tabs. You can do contra soil like what's in there. It's usually the much cheaper overall to just set up something brand new. And I always say, plan ahead. Plan for the tank that you want in the future, and not for what you think you might need now. And then on the next slide, we have what I feel is some aspects of a successful planted tank, and to be successful in aquascaping. Your lighting is the most important. Plants in the wild, they can't grow without sun. You got to replicate the sun somehow in your tank. So the lighting is the most important. Your substrate, I would say, is probably the second most important. And it's all based on what you're wanting to do with the tank, whether you want to go inert with root tabs, dirt, or aquatic plant soil. And then you got your filtration and your flow. It's different based on the style. Like a Wallstead tank, very, very little to no filtration and flow, just a small power head. But then when you have like a super high-tech tank like a Dutch, when I had a Dutch 40 breeder, my filter on it was rated for, I believe, 200 gallons, and then I had a 800 gallon per hour wave maker in there too. Tons and tons of flows to keep algae from growing on plants and to spread the nutrients around. And then that's the next aspect too, is your nutrients and your ferts. There's individual liquids out there. You have your all-in-one liquids, root tabs, there's dry ferts. The majority of people can get away with pretty decent success with just having a really nutrient-rich substrate and never having to dose for at least the first year until the nutrients start diminishing in the substrate. But you will have good success if you learn how to dose and you find a balance in your tank. And then you got CO2. Do you want DIY or pressurized? I think the pressurized is the better aspect of a successful planted tank. DIY, you can get by with it, but it's inconsistent. One day you'll forget about it and your CO2 runs out, and then you went without CO2 for 24 hours on your tank, and then you put it back on and create a fluctuation that's going to now cause an algae outbreak or a bacterial bloom or some kind of imbalance caused by that. Whereas a pressurized system, you just set it on a timer, it comes on the same time every day. Just keep a look at your gauge on your regulator, and when it's low, go and fill it up. I like getting big tanks because you don't have to worry about them. I had a 20-pound tank that is running 155 gallon. And then your plant choice, meet the needs of the plants that you plan to keep. It also goes hand in hand with planning. Plan on wanting to upgrade to save money and time. everybody at some point, if you start having success, you're going to want to upgrade. So buy that upgrade starting out and save the money of having to buy multiple tanks. You've got multiple lights. A good high-tech tank can be dialed back to become low-tech, but rarely the opposite. And then on the next slide, we have about finding the balance in your planted tank. Our tanks provide the perfect conditions for nuisance algae and pests to thrive. Finding the balance refers to balancing your tank to where the plants outcompete the algae, causing it to either die off or never grow to begin with. The best way to start, you start low and increase as the tank matures based on the needs of the plants. Lower light, lower amounts of ferts, lower amounts of fish food, shorter photo periods. Perform your routine maintenance regularly, test your water often, keep track of things, and increase if things are going well. Increase in small increments, so if something happens, you can easily dial it back. And keep track of that too. Don't just keep track of everything that's going good, keep track of the bad things. For quite a while, I used to have a little notebook next to every single one of my tanks to write down the water parameters before I did my water changes, after I did my water changes. You don't have to do that permanently, but after a couple of months, you'll know exactly what's going on in your tank. You'll know that, okay, well, I just dosed some phosphorus, and I know that I have a bunch of red plants in there that in 5 days, I'm not going to have any phosphorus in there, so I can probably dose again and not have to worry about a phosphate outbreak causing green spot algae. So finding the balance is just start low and be patient. I think most imbalanced tanks are usually caused by impatience. And then the next slide, this is where we start the pictures about my progress. Some of my progress in planting tanks. The main tank is my 29 gallon that I was showing you with the Oscar. That's the majority of these pictures. It's also the reason why I say a brand new setup can be a better overall. I learned a lot with it, but man, I started out with the basic light that came with the tank, and then I went to those clip-on desk lamps, and then I went to 2 of the current USA satellite lights, and then I went to a Finex Ray 2, and then I went to a Finex 24/7 on that. So I've spent a lot of money on that tank, a lot of time ripping out substrates. So we can go ahead and start going through the pictures. That's the 29 gallon, same picture that you saw before. And then in the very next picture after that was, I think this was after my first SCAPE meeting. I think that's where I got all those plants. It was at Lotus Aquariums. Started learning, ripped out all the gravel, put sand in there. There's tons of root tabs in there. At that time I couldn't afford aquatic plant soil. Had my driftwood in there that I was trying to make into a moss tree. I was like in love with moss trees when I first got into it. I wanted one in like every one of my tanks. And then in the next picture, I got rid of some of the driftwood, rearranged things, put some rocks in there. This tank eventually becomes a Dutch tank, and this isn't that. You can kind of see my progression towards it. I start losing hardscape and start adding more and more plants. This is the next picture is me being impatient and getting an imbalance in my tank, and green spot algae all over all my driftwood, my rocks. It was all over the glass, but I always cleaned the glass before I took the pictures. So you could actually see the algae on the base all the way around the glass where I didn't scrub it. And then the next picture is that 29 gallon as a Dutch. that was really, really interesting trying to make a Dutch tank out of a 29 gallon. They have very, very little depth from front to back. And like one of the things you want to do with a Dutch Aquascape is create as much depth as you can. So it was really interesting trying to figure out the placement of those plants. And then the next picture, this is how I had started planting the Dutch tank in my 40 breeders. So I ripped out all the plants and got all kinds of hardscape. I wanted to go low tech with this because I was going to have a really super colorful Dutch tank in the room that needed a lot of maintenance. So it was just lava rock, Java ferns. I forget what fish were in there right now at this point. I think it was just a bunch of neons. Yeah, you can see the neons in the next picture. We rearranged the driftwood some. Put some spiral chain sword in the back. There's an Amazon sword in the back left. There's beta in there. I don't know why a lot of people like to put betas in such small tanks. I know they're perfectly fine in a 5-gallon tank, but if you put a beta in like a 55 or a 29 or a 40, it has some really cool personalities. That beta I had for like almost 3 years. He used to swim into my plants in a Dutch tank and just sleep in the plants. And then the next slide. This was my attempt at a shrimp tank, and I had set it up from scratch as a $10 or the $10 Petco dollar per gallon sale. It's a dirted tank, which I learned that was not a good idea for shrimp. All the excess nutrients in the water column for the first couple of months, I was having die-offs left and right. I had my moss tree. I was in love with those things. Had an anacarus, which is normally a floating plant, but I was actually able to get it to root without it melting away. And then the next slide after that is the 10-gallon curved rimless that you saw earlier. I had started to learn more about the rule of thirds, your focal points, how to create depth. So that's why I have the driftwood. Those driftwood pieces are actually glued to those rocks so they don't move, and I wanted them facing towards you, so it creates the depth of you looking almost like you're looking through the trees into the rocks. And then the next slide is a little bit further out on that one, showing that just how simple of a setup it is. And then the next slide is the beginning of the 40 breeder Dutch. I just had the three clip-on lights at this point on here. I was waiting for my lights that I had on there for the length of it. I was waiting for them to come. I had, from this picture, I believe from this picture to the next picture, I went from those 3 clip-on lights to my 2 Chihiros A901 Plus on the next slide. I was able to grow really good plants, or I had really good growth with those lights, and they were very adjustable. You can see the power head on the left that I had, and the filtration that I was running. I used the Pogo Erectus to disguise my filter intake. As it grew taller, you would never even see it. The heater was disguised behind the plants in the back left. In the slide after this, you can see what happened to a Dutch tank when you let it fully grow out and then don't trim it for a couple of weeks. But all the equipment is hidden, and there's just so many plants in there. I had a glosso carpet that was like, started at like 6 inches thick in the front and went to about 10 inches thick in the back. And then I had really, really great growth with that. But if you look in the center where that Pogo Erectus is, that black in the middle of it, I had a really bad outbreak of Blackbeard Algae. That's one of the hardest things about having a Dutch tank, is that they require so many nutrients to get them to grow the way that you see in the pictures and get the color it's a constant teetering act of whether or not you're going to have algae or whether or not you're going to have a pretty tank. If you want to learn about this hobby and try to become an expert as fast as possible, I would say just get yourself a Dutch tank. You'll learn a lot with it. All right, and that's the last. The next slide is the last one. It's just if you want to go on and see any of the threads that I've pulled these pictures out of, you can search me on the forum, and if you go to the advanced search option, you can find all the threads that I've started. There's a real detailed step-by-step process on how to plant a Dutch tank and how to get your pathways and your focal points going and why you want to plant things the way you do. And then my Instagram is there if you guys want to see pictures of other my tanks or some of the stuff that I've been breeding. I kind of stepped back from aquascaping quite a bit. I only have like 3 planted tanks right now versus like the 17 or 18 planted tanks that I had a couple years ago. Now I have just like the 3 planted tanks and a dozen breeding tanks. But that's it, everybody. Let me know if you guys have any questions or anything.
All right, so I gave everybody the ability to unmute yourself. So if you have a question, feel free to just unmute and ask or type it in the chat box. Or not. I see Mark Allen joined us. Welcome, Mark.
Ah, nice.
Yeah,
I wasn't expecting there to be too many questions. I mean, quite a few of the people that showed up today, it looks like they're been in the club for a while, so they know what's going on. They know aquascaping, so not too many questions really needed, I guess.
Yeah, well, we always want to offer the newbie something, so this is good to offer it, and it's a good refresher for some of us, even old timers.
Hello, I'm Nick. I'm brand new. I thought it was very informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I had a question. If you're using like a clay-based soil, like fluval stratum or something like that, would you recommend capping it with like sand or something for a shrimp tank?
Usually if you're using a substrate like fluval stratum or contra soil, you don't really want to do a cap with it. I find that the shrimp like playing around with the little pieces of the soil, but also the sand is finer, so the sand will gravitate through the pieces of the aquatic plant soil, and it'll end up just mixing over time. If you want the mixed look effect, it looks pretty cool. But yeah, I would just say just leave the aquatic plant soil uncapped and just plant your plants directly in it. The only time I usually use a cap of any kind on any type of soil is when it's like potting soil or dirt. And that stuff, it has to have a pretty decent cap on it, because otherwise it'll try to float up. I had a dirted tank flip its substrate on me one time. I had about an inch of potting soil on the bottom of a 40 breeder tank, and I only had about an inch for my sand cap. And as I was filling it up and I had it all planted and everything, I was filling it up for the first time. Got about 3/4 of the way full, saw a couple of bubbles, and the sand was suddenly on the bottom and all of the soil was floating in the tank. So if you're gonna do, that's the only time I recommend the sand cap. And the dirt, I recommend a heavy sand cap or a heavy gravel cap.
Sure, that sounds pretty tragic.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Nick. One of the reasons you invest in getting a specialized aqua soil is so that you don't have to use anything else. You know, like Cole was mentioning, the sand cap for a dirted tank. A big reason for that is to keep it down. And really, in an aquascaping application, the only time you would use sand is just for texture or for color variation. You know, so the reason you spend the extra money to get aquarium soil or a specialized substrate is so you can just use one kind. You know, and I've tried several times using sand in conjunction with soil, and it's a major pain in the butt. It's just not worth it. Unless you're doing something super fancy for like a photo contest type of deal, it's really not functional. It's not practical. If you ever uproot a plant or a plant floats up on you, or you trim a plant, like Cole was saying, it's going to flip that. Your sand or gravel or whatever you've got is going to end up at the bottom, and your substrate, dirt, whatever, is going to end up at the top, and it's a nightmare.
Sure. The reason why I asked is because it seemed like there was like conflicting information on whether like to cap it to retain nutrients in the soil, otherwise the soil will leach, or not to cap it so you have surface area for the shrimp to, I guess, graze and stuff like that.
Well, if you're focusing just on shrimp, you don't need aqua soil either. You know, when I was breeding shrimp exclusively, you know, bare bottom is the way to go. It's easier to clean. They'll eat the algae that grows on the bottom. There's no real reason to invest in a substrate that's intended to feed plants if your focus is the shrimp. But I mean, of course, if you're doing something in combination, then, you know, the ADA stuff for decades has been a staple because it does help buffer the water a little bit. But it's also great for the plants if you're doing something that's a combination planted and shrimp tank.
Yeah, I know the aquatic soils too. They'll buffer really well if you're planning on doing Caradina, which are usually soft water shrimp. But like John said, if you're doing RO water, that's totally neutral, and you're remineralizing it. You can do a bare bottom tank if you wanted to with shrimp. But most people, like let me turn on my camera. Let's see. John, you want to make it to where the screen can go to different people, and I'll show them this tank real quick. So this is a Caradina tank. I got the contra soil in there, but I got a little carpet of plants growing in there. So, but if I wanted to, I could do totally RO water, remineralize, and just bare bottom. The tanks that I breed cherry shrimp in were usually just bare sand tanks, inert, but they like to sift through the sand and feed on stuff. So I like to have something in there. So I don't usually do bare bottom. If I don't want substrate, I'll throw in a ton of moss.
That's a really good looking tank.
Thank you. That's one of my planted tanks, and then that's my 55 right there. That thing is kind of overstocked right now. I got I had to throw quite a few male rams in there that I had to pull out of my room from my breeding. It was just a bunch of it was just the angels and a couple of discus, and then the Congo tetras I had to put in there because I started breeding my spotted Congo puffers, and I had those in the tank, and I didn't want them eating the eggs. You guys are welcome to do a little show and tell, and or if you guys got any questions or anything about your tanks, and if you can put a visual to the question, we can maybe help you out while we're all on the Zoom.
I want to see some of Ryan's stuff.
Ryan's got a little gallery.
I know he does. That's why I want to see it.
I'm still here.
Sound like you just like jumped in from outside. It's like, I'm still here.
Show us your tanks.
All right, I'll show you guys around. Let's see. So I don't really use Zoom, so hopefully this works. What do I do? Start. What did I press? Start video, no?
Yeah, start video. Hit that start. There you are. Yeah.
Alrighty. All right, guys.
Yep, there's that gallery. Mr. 10,000 Instagram followers. Oh, did you flood it? Nice. No, that thing was a dry start for a while. It's good.
What light is that on that smaller tank?
I'm pretty sure it's a Chihiros, but I'm not sure what model it is. You can't hear you, Ryan. I don't know. Did you mute yourself?
Chihiro's WRGB.
Those are pretty.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear
Oh,
you.
we can hear you now.
Yeah, we can hear you. Did you make the light stand yourself?
No, this is a Chihiro's light stand as well.
Okay.
Here's the 4-gallon cube
With the ONF light?
with an on-off light, yeah. Oh yeah, the parrot feather is random. Trying to keep it from drying out. Here's Timmy. Here, I'll show you guys a little sneak peek. I haven't really shown anyone on Instagram yet or anything. It's a little pondscape I'm working on.
Nice. I like the river. I like the round river rocks.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I was trying to go for something a little different in terms of like hardscape, because I know not a lot of people use the round river rocks, you know?
Yeah.
And it's going to be connected with a Chihiro's, I think it's called C2. It's kind of similar to the ONF.
Nice.
Well,
Yeah, I know Chihiros has been coming out with some good lights.
Yeah. Let's venture into my room, show you guys some smaller setups. Sorry, it's kind of messy. Here's like one of my pond tanks. I'm gonna be tearing this down in a couple weeks or so. Right. Little dry start project I'm working on.
Do you have a problem with fish jumping out of those shallow little tanks?
Surprisingly, no. I haven't had any jumpers yet.
Wow.
Here are some long fins, white cloud minnows.
Nice.
Do you have to do a lot of water changes with that one since it's so shallow with the fish?
Once a week at about 90%. In the beginning, I was doing it daily for 30 days.
But now the plants are established enough that it helps with the filtration.
Yeah, and it's fully cycled, so.
Right,
And
yeah,
you-
right.
You're
Ryan's
using all
developed-
RO water?
RO mix. So I mix my RO with tap water.
Yeah, Ryan's got some pretty good methods. He's developed his own little cycling process that he does, and the dude never has any problems with any algae outbreaks in his new tanks because of the way he cycles them.
Yeah, it's just a lot of people when they set up a new scape, you know, they rush to plant it, and then you got to cycle it, and with the soil leaching ammonia, they get a lot of algae and plant melting, you know, et cetera, like that. My method is I do the hardscape, I add the soil, and I don't plant it right away. I keep the tank dark for about 3 to 4 weeks, and I do about, I don't know, big water changes about 80%, about 2 or 3 times a week. But this method only works if you have a filter that's already cycled. How this works is that since the soil is leaching ammonia, your filter that's already cycled is just gonna, you know, suck all that up.
So you have
And
a
since
like a
since the
sorry.
lights aren't on, since the lights aren't on, you won't get any algae. It's called a dark start.
And what kind of filter do you use while you're doing that?
Any filter. I mean, I mainly run canisters on my show tanks. I run Awaze and Eheim filters.
And how about for these more shallow ones?
These shallow tanks have no filters, except this one. This one has a little Azu filter.
So when you start it with the dark start on those shallow ones, how do you use the established filter media?
So what I do is, you know, I have multiple tanks running at multiple, you know, all the time. So I just take some filter media from the other tanks, and I just use that, you know, replace it with the new media, or squeeze in a bunch of gunk from another tank just to get it started.
So you just squeeze the filter into the ones, or filter media into the ones that don't have filters.
Exactly. Or just replace the media in general. So I'll take some, you know, I'll take some from the canisters and add it into these small ones.
Yeah, no, to cycle like a tank, like what you're saying, to cycle a tank where you're not using a filter, he can take just a piece of that sponge, and from one of his other filters that's cycled, and just set the sponge in the tank with no filter, and it'll do the same thing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I have set up in one of my little shadow paludarium sort of situations.
This is probably one of the best filter on the market. I highly recommend it. It's the Awaze BioSmart, I believe.
Nice.
This one is very unique because it has a heater built into the filter. So, you know, if you don't like to show heaters in your tank, this is one of the best ones.
Those are the ones that they use down at Aqua SD and all their ADA display tanks.
Yeah. Here's a smaller version.
I think that was really cool and innovative for them to put the heater inside the filter.
But yeah, it's my little setup.
And those are the stands that you got from Nolan?
Yeah, these are all custom made by Nolan and his team. I don't know if they make it himself or he goes to a guy. I think he goes to a guy, but he can make it identical to ADA or UNS stands, and it'll cost you 60% cheaper than the actual UNS tanks or stands.
Nice.
Yeah, highly recommend it. But yeah, Cole, great presentation, man. I enjoy every bit of it.
Thank you.
A lot of great information for, you know, new hobbyists out there.
Here, let me see. I'll turn on my video too and show you guys something. See if I can even capture them on video. They're so small. This is the spotted Congo puffer fry tank. There's that tiny little speck in the middle of the sponge filter right there. That's a fry. They're unbelievably.
They are so tiny.
Yeah, they disappear. And then I have my got all kinds of stuff on here from breeding the puffers, but this is the actual puffer tank. fuckers like to hide anchors. There's one. That's Squirt. He's a wild caught. And then Walter, the other male, he likes to hide back there usually. Can't really see him right now.
I think your
Usually
connection's
somewhere
getting
in the
spotty.
punching at him.
You sound drunk.
Yeah, my room's farther away from my router.
It's all right. We got a peek at the puffers. Cool. Anybody else want to show off something or have any questions? If not, we can call it a day. Stay tuned for the next one. Cole, do you have any ideas of when we might have another meeting?
I've been trying to get a hold of Corey from Aquarium Co-op about possibly doing one, but he's been kind of really busy, he says, so he hasn't had much time. And like I've been looking at his videos and stuff that he's been doing on YouTube, and the stuff that he's been doing with Dean. I guess they're doing quite a few new breeding projects. But I have a couple of people that I'm going to be talking to a little bit further about trying to get a presentation, like possibly Jacob from Jacob's Aquariums.
Cool. I guess we'll get the information up on the forum and Discord and Facebook, all that stuff when we have it. There's a question in the chat. It looks like it's for Ryan. Name of the filter with the heater that's built in. Cole, do you know what that is?
He said it a few times.
Yeah.
I think it's a OASE filter, OASE.
OASE.
Yeah, those ones come with the heaters built in. Some of them have digital readouts with temperature readings as well. But I think his is one of the models without the digital readouts. But they are really nice filters, I've heard.
Oh, it looks like a Petco carries them.
I think there's other makers that have canisters with built-in heaters as well.
Yeah, I know. What's Les's company? Cobalt. Cobalt had toyed around with different canister filter features, but yeah, this OASE Biomaster. I just Googled it real quick. Interesting. I'll put it in the chat, Pauline. Yep, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Anybody else? The one that does not say thermo doesn't include the heater. Yep. Not a bad price. A couple $100 for a decent filter. It's definitely worth it, guys. I've always been a big proponent of using high quality filters. You know, the cheap stuff, you know, not to bag on Sun, but you know, if you want to have problems 4-6 months down the road because you're trying to save $40-50, more power to you. But I've always been of the opinion, you know, $100-200 for a filter goes a long way. That's a big investment, you know, as much as investing in a good light or investing in a good substrate. You know, whenever I recommended things to newbies, I told them, look, if you can't afford that $40, just wait another month or two, save up that extra $40 because it's going to save you years of headache. You know, kind of like what Cole was saying about starting from scratch versus trying to save some pennies by reusing what you got. You know, if that means putting off a hobby for a month or two, 6 months, or even a year to do it right, I'm sure Ryan would agree, as evident by all of his high quality equipment. It's worth the money. It's worth the wait. If I had to give some unsolicited advice.
Oh yeah, I always recommend good filtration as well. I always tell people buy a filter for the next size tank, bigger than yours at least, and try to get one that has adjustable flow. Because like my 75-gallon in the room with the puffers, that has the Aquatop 500 UV canister filter. It's rated for like 270 gallons. But I have it right now. I have it on full blast just because the puffers they like the water current, and they're known to be messy heaters. But you get a filter rated for that. I mean, dial it back. That's more filtration than I will ever need, and just spend the extra, like John said, spend the extra bucks to get something quality. You get what you pay for. Especially with,
Go ahead, Cole. Sorry.
well, I was gonna say, just especially with those canisters that have the heater built into them. I mean, if they're only $200, you got to think about it. If you want the equipment out of your tank, you're gonna spend 120, 130 bucks on a canister filter, and then you're gonna spend 60, 70, 80 bucks on an inline heater anyway. So you're already spending the 200. Might as well get something that is quality, and you already heard some good reviews from other hobbyists in the club.
Just to add on top of that, throughout the couple of years I've been in this hobby, it's just a lot better if you spend the money now rather than buying something and replacing it in the future. And then, when you try to sell that used item, it's not worth as much. You know what I mean? So overall, you're just going to be spending more money anyways.
Oh yeah, the drop-off rate on the value of aquarium products once they're used is horrible.
Cool beans. Anybody else? Well, thank you everybody for joining. Sydney, it was particularly good to see you for a second there. Yeah,
Thanks.
I think you and Christian have been in this club probably the longest. So anyway, Cole, anything else from you, boss?
I don't think so. I think that's everything.
Excellent. Cool. Well, thanks everybody. We'll cut it off and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Nice to meet everybody.
Everybody take care.
Bye.
Bye.